Hey, we're back with Margaret Sullivan. This is Francis Tapon with the WanderLearn show, and she has written a book called Following the Sun. And in it, she has each chapter devoted to one of the 29 countries that she visited with her family. She had two children, two young children, in fact, and a husband, and all of them went around for basically a year to all these countries. What a whirlwind trip. Now, I want to focus in on the African countries that she went to, because for many people, I think, going to, let's say, I don't know, Japan, New Zealand with their children, or France, it's, and certainly Hawaii, it's all like, everybody can imagine that. But Mozambique, maybe not so much. Maybe even Egypt is something of a stretch. And South Africa, Zambia, these are all countries that you went to. Zimbabwe. Tell us a little bit about how you might have either overcome that maybe fear. I think you used a travel agent for much of the Africa portion, who just kind of soup to nuts figured out all your itinerary. But tell us a little bit more about how the Africa part of your trip went.
Sure. Africa was the second continent that we went to, and we spent 9 weeks there. And yes, we did use a travel agent who was South African, and she plotted an itinerary that was really beautiful, a mix of, the standard American trajectory of safari in Cape Town. But then she also plotted road trips for us, and she suggested a country we would not have probably come up with ourselves, Mozambique. We had said, what about the Seychelles? And she said, why don't you go to Mozambique, a country that is not on the tourist path necessarily as much as a place like Seychelles that gets all the glossy spreads, and check it out. And same with Zambia and Zimbabwe, which has had a great comeback in recent years. And so we spent the most amount of time in South Africa. And I would say the longer we stayed, the safer we felt. We're New Yorkers. We know how to walk fast. We know how to keep ourselves safe. We're not going to keep ourselves open to crimes of opportunity. I mean, that's everywhere. That's Johannesburg and New York City. So we never actually felt unsafe in any of the places that we went, despite some pearl clutching from Americans who wondered what we were thinking, taking our small children to some of these places. But they were wonderful, and we had fantastic experiences meeting local kids. Our kids played a lot of pickup soccer with them. We met local families. We had meals with folks. It was just fantastic.
What would you suggest of people if they don't have a flight, somebody to plan the whole itinerary? What would you tell them? Somebody says, no, I'd rather plan my own itinerary. I don't want to have a professional guide to do it for me. Would you say that's a mistake?
The only thing that's tricky with that is that a lot of if you're going to fly, they're just charter planes that are can be difficult to figure out on your own. But absolutely, it can be done. We met people who, they went on safari, but they weren't going and staying at a fancy lodge and having a private guide. They were renting a vehicle and camping. And there are tons of national parks where you can go in your own vehicle. You have to follow strict guidelines and agree to them. But, you can do this on your own. You do not need to be handheld by people in the tourism industry.
How did you do with the language barrier, particularly at Mozambique, where they speak Portuguese generally?
We never had an issue. Everywhere we went, there was some English to be spoken. So we threw out our bom dias and then were greeted back with hello.
What about Zimbabwe? Zimbabwe, out of all those countries, well, maybe Mozambique, but Zimbabwe has been struggling for the last, 40 years, maybe.
Right. Yeah.
What would you say what was your experience there? Was it, I imagine because you were on a safari, you kind of missed out on some of the logistical challenges that the locals face.
Exactly.
Right?
Zimbabwe was, for us, entirely safari. So we were out in the bush, and we did not have a city experience in Zimbabwe that I could share. But I will say that the people that we met were some of the greatest we met all year. And we just had we had one rainy day. It was one of my most indelible memories of the trip, a rainy day sitting around with our guides and the folks who worked at our lodge. And we were the only people staying there. And they taught us their board games, and we brought some of ours out of our backpack, and we ended up having this raucous, rollicking, hilarious afternoon of teaching each other funny games, and it was a blast.
Last question about Egypt. Now, Egypt has the Temple of Karnak, which I think you skipped because your whole family was tired.
Our kids skipped it. They stayed in the van.
Okay. Right. So what would you say about that?
Karnak, is one of the most spectacular places you could ever see in the world. This is like the fact that this temple is still standing in all this glory and in all of its enormity is phenomenal. I wish that, and this goes back to the conversation about balancing tourism, I wish that we had not packed our itinerary so heavily that by the time we got to this wonder of the world, we weren't just completely depleted and exhausted and like, the next. So it's a lesson that if you've got a Karnak on the itinerary, maybe weed out some of the other stuff just to save your energy and really appreciate it in all its splendor.
Well said. Margaret Sullivan, thank you again for writing the book, Following the Sun. Get it on Amazon. Get it on your website. One more time, your website, please.
MargaretBensfieldSullivan.com.
That's a mouthful, so we'll put it in the show notes. Okay. Thank you again. And that ends this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we've talked about, go to WanderLearn.com and click on this episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is always my social media username. My website is ftapon.com. Do you want to leave me an anonymous voicemail where you can make a comment or ask a question? Then go to speakpipe.com/ftapon. Furthermore, if you'd like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. Now, 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, download it. 3, share it. 4, review it. And 5, sign up for my newsletter at WanderLearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.